Dust and Redemption, A Frontier Love Story Part 1. The Abandoned Homestead. The Oklahoma Territory stretched endless and unforgiving under the pale autumn sky. Michael Carver stood in the doorway of the soddy his father had built 3 years prior, staring at the wagon tracks that disappeared over the eastern ridge. They were 2 days old now, maybe 3. He'd stopped counting the hours since his family had left him behind. At 23, Michael had always been different. Quieter than his father wanted, gentler than frontier life demanded, more interested in books than breaking horses. His mother had loved him anyway, or so he'd thought, until the morning he woke to find them packing in silence. His 2 sisters, Rebecca and Sarah, had cried as they loaded their belongings, but not enough to stay. His father hadn't looked at him at all. "You're a grown man now," his father had said, the only words he'd spoken directly to Michael in weeks. "This land is yours if you want it. We're going back to St. Louis where things make sense." What his father meant, though he wouldn't say it, was that Michael didn't make sense. Not the way he'd refused Martha Hensley's advances at the church social. Not the way he'd looked at Thomas Brennan, the blacksmith's apprentice, with something too tender in his eyes. His father had seen it, and that was enough. Now Michael stood alone on 40 acres of stubborn prairie, with a half-finished barn, 6 chickens, 1 contrary mule, and a well that threatened to run dry before winter. The isolation pressed against him like a physical weight. At night, the silence was so complete it felt like drowning. He'd been rationing the flour and cornmeal his family had left behind, stretching it thin as paper. The garden had mostly failed. He'd never had his mother's touch with growing things. Each day blurred into the next. Hauling water, mending fences that kept nothing in or out, talking to the mule because the sound of his own voice was the only thing keeping him tethered to the world. On the morning of the 4th day, Michael was replacing rotted boards on the barn when he heard the horse. The sound carried across the prairie like a warning, hoofbeats coming fast, desperate. He straightened, shading his eyes against the October sun, and watched the rider approach. The man on the horse was tall and lean, maybe 30 years old, with dark hair that touched his collar and several days of stubble shadowing his jaw. His clothes were trail-worn, his hat pulled low, but it was his eyes that caught Michael's attention. Sharp and wary, the eyes of something hunted. The horse beneath him was lathered and trembling, pushed to the edge of endurance. "Water," the stranger said, not a question but a statement of raw need. His voice was rough, dried out by wind and dust. Michael nodded toward the well. "Help yourself. There's a trough for your horse." The stranger dismounted in one fluid motion, and Michael noticed the way he favored his left side, the dark stain on his shirt that might have been old blood. The man caught him looking and pulled his coat closed, his jaw tightening. "I won't be trouble," the stranger said. "Just water, then I'm gone." But as he led his horse to the trough, the animal's front leg buckled. The stranger caught the reins, steadying the horse with a gentleness that surprised Michael. He ran his hands down the horse's leg, examining it with practiced care. "Thrown a shoe and coming up lame," the stranger muttered. "Damn it all." Michael approached slowly. "There's space in the barn. Your horse needs rest, not more miles." The stranger's eyes flicked to the horizon, to the empty prairie behind him, calculating distances and dangers Michael could only guess at. "Can't stay. Got men following. Marshals." A bitter smile crossed the stranger's face. "Among others." Michael should have sent him on his way. Should have protected himself, his land, the fragile solitude he'd barely learned to survive. But something in the stranger's eyes, some bone-deep exhaustion that mirrored his own, made him say, "Barn's empty anyway. One night won't make a difference." The stranger studied him for a long moment, weighing trust against desperation. Finally he nodded. "Name's John Marston. And I'll be gone by first light. Michael Carver. This is my land." The words felt hollow. His land. His solitude. His failure. They led the horse into the barn's dim interior. Michael found himself watching the way John moved, careful but capable, gentle with the animal despite his own obvious pain. When John pulled off his coat to wipe down the horse, Michael saw the bandage wrapped around his ribs, the blood seeping through. "You're hurt. Been through worse. That needs cleaning unless you want infection to finish what the bullet started." John's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Wasn't a bullet. Was a knife in a fight I didn't start." He paused, then added, "I'm not what you think. I don't think anything yet. Most men would. Stranger riding hard with law behind him. That usually tells a clear enough story. Michael met his gaze. My father always said you can tell everything about a man in the first minute. Turns out he was wrong about most things. Something shifted in John's expression, a wariness giving way to curiosity. What was he wrong about? Me mostly. Michael turned away, uncomfortable with the admission. There's a pump behind the Saudi. I'll bring bandages and something to eat. Then you can tell me whether you're worth the trouble I'm about to get into. Part 2, Stories in the Dark. Night fell fast on the prairie, pulling shadows long across the land. Michael brought cornbread and beans to the barn, along with clean cloth and the bottle of whiskey his father had left behind, probably because it was nearly empty. John had made a small fire in a metal bucket, just enough light to see by, not enough to draw attention from miles away. They sat on hay bales across from each other, the fire between them casting their faces in warm, wavering light. John ate like a man who hadn't seen food in days, and Michael didn't ask when he'd last had a proper meal. Some questions had answers you didn't want to hear. You said you didn't start the fight, Michael said finally. But someone thinks you did. John set down his plate and stared into the fire. 3 months ago, I was working a ranch outside of Kansas City. Good work, honest pay. There was a man there, a gambler named Vincent Cross. He liked cards and he liked winning, but mostly he liked when people owed him. He paused, jaw working. He got a local farmer into debt. Man named Thomas Whitmore had a wife and 3 kids. Cross wanted Whitmore's land, was going to take everything. So you stepped in. I told Cross to forgive the debt. He laughed in my face. We fought, I won't lie about that. But when I left him he was breathing. Angry and bruised, but breathing. John's hands curled into this. Next morning they found him dead in the alley behind the saloon. Knife wound to the chest. And I was the only one they knew who'd had trouble with him. But you didn't do it. No. But I couldn't prove it, and Cross had friends, men with money and influence. The marshal was going to hang me without a trial, let alone an investigation. So I ran. He looked up at Michael, his eyes reflecting firelight. Been running ever since. That's the truth of it. I'm not some noble outlaw. I'm just a man who was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Michael believed him. Maybe he was a fool for it, but something in John's voice rang true, a resignation and exhaustion that couldn't be faked. Where are you running to? Thought I'd head west. California maybe. Or Mexico. Somewhere the marshals don't care about a killing in Kansas City. John's smile was sad. Somewhere I can stop looking over my shoulder. That's a lonely way to live. Says the man living alone on 40 acres of nothing. The observation was too accurate to argue. Michael poked at the fire with a stick. I had family here. Until a few days ago. They decided I wasn't worth staying for. Why? It was Michael's turn to stare into flames. He'd never said the words out loud to anyone, never admitted what his father had seen, what he himself barely understood. But here in the darkness, with a stranger who would be gone by morning, the truth felt safer. Because I'm not the son my father wanted. Not the kind of man he could understand. Michael's voice dropped. I don't want what other men want. Not the way I'm supposed to anyway. The silence stretched between them. Michael waited for judgment, for disgust, for John to stand up and leave despite his lame horse. Instead, John said quietly, the man who got killed, Vincent Cross, he knew something about me too. That's really why we fought. Michael looked up. John's expression was carefully neutral. He saw me with another ranch hand. Nothing happened, but the way I looked at him, Cross saw it. He threatened to tell everyone to ruin me. Said men like me didn't deserve to work alongside decent folk. His voice hardened. That's when I hit him. And that's why nobody looked too hard for another killer. They figured a man like me was capable of anything. The words hung in the air between them, an admission and an offering. Michael felt something loosen in his chest, some tight knot he'd been carrying for years without knowing its name. My father saw the way I looked at Thomas Brennan at the church social, Michael said. Didn't say a word, but 2 weeks later they were packing. Just like that. 23 years and I was disposable. I'm sorry. Are you? Or are you relieved you're not the only one? John's laugh was surprised, almost genuine. Maybe both. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the prairie wind and the soft sounds of John's horse settling in for the night. The fire burned down to embers. Finally, Michael said, "Your horse needs at least 3 days before she can travel. Maybe more. I can't stay 3 days. The marshals haven't come yet. And if they do, I'll tell them I haven't seen anyone." Michael met John's eyes across the dying fire. "You said you'd be gone by first light. I'm saying you don't have to be. Why would you do that for me?" Michael considered the question. Because he was lonely. Because John's story echoed his own. Because for the first time in weeks, he'd had a conversation with another human being that didn't feel like slow suffocation. Because everyone deserves one person who doesn't run away. John's expression shifted. Surprise, gratitude, and something that might have been hope. 3 days then. And I'll work for my keep. That barn of yours needs finishing. Deal. They shook hands across the embers, and Michael felt the warmth of John's palm against his own, calloused and strong. He told himself it meant nothing, this flutter in his chest. Told himself he was just grateful for the company. But when he walked back to the soddy under a sky full of stars, he couldn't stop thinking about the way John had looked at him in the firelight. Like maybe Michael wasn't disposable after all. Part 3, Building Something. John was true to his word. At first light, Michael found him already at work on the barn, moving carefully but steadily despite his injury. Over the next 3 days they fell into an easy rhythm. John had a craftsman's skill with wood and tools, and under his direction the barn began to take proper shape. They worked side by side in the autumn sunshine, the physical labor a welcome distraction from their respective troubles. Michael discovered that John had a quiet sense of humor, dry observations that caught him off guard and made him laugh. John seemed surprised each time, as if he'd forgotten what it was like to make someone smile. In the evenings, they cooked simple meals together and talked about everything except the things that mattered most. The law behind John, the family that had abandoned Michael, the dangerous comfort they were beginning to find in each other's company. On the 4th day, when John's horse was sound again, neither of them mentioned leaving. "The roof on the soddy needs patching," John said instead, studying the structure with a critical eye. "Winter's coming. You'll freeze if we don't fix those gaps." "We?" Michael asked. John met his gaze. "If you'll have me. Just a while longer." Michael should have said no. Should have thought about the danger, the impracticality, the inevitable moment when the law would catch up or John would move on. Instead, he said, "There's work enough for 2 men here. And winter on the prairie is hard alone." So John stayed. They patched the roof and reinforced the barn. They fixed the well pump and mended every fence on the property. John taught Michael how to hunt properly, and they brought down a deer that would keep them in meat for weeks. Michael taught John to read, not from scratch but the difficult words he'd stumbled over, the passages from books that Michael loved. In the evenings, they sat close together against the autumn chill, Michael reading aloud by lamplight while John whittled or mended harness. Sometimes their shoulders touched, and neither of them moved away. Sometimes Michael caught John watching him instead of listening to the story, and had to read the same sentence twice to remember where he was. The first snow came in mid-November, light flurries that dusted the prairie white. They were working in the barn when it started, and John paused to watch through the open door, something melancholy in his expression. "What are you thinking?" Michael asked. "That I should be in Mexico by now. Somewhere warm." John turned to him. "That I've stayed too long, put you at risk for nothing but my own selfishness." "You're not selfish." "I am. Because I know I should leave and I can't make myself do it." John's voice dropped. "Because every morning I wake up and tell myself today's the day, and then I see you and I think about one more day. Just one more." Michael's heart hammered against his ribs. "What if I don't want you to leave?" "Michael. I know it's dangerous. I know we could both end up." He couldn't finish the sentence. "But I've spent my whole life alone, John. Even when my family was here, I was alone. And then you showed up and for the first time I'm not." John closed the distance between them in 3 strides. He stood close enough that Michael could feel the warmth radiating from him, could count the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "Do you know what you're saying?" "I know exactly what I'm saying." John's hand came up slowly, carefully, giving Michael every chance to pull away. His fingers brushed Michael's jaw, rough and gentle at once. "If we do this, there's no going back. Your reputation, your safety. We're already gone the moment my family left." John searched his face for a long moment. Then he leaned in and kissed him, soft and questioning. Michael had never been kissed before, had never let himself imagine what it might feel like. The reality was both strange and achingly right. The scratch of John's stubble, the warm press of his lips, the careful way he held Michael like something precious. When they broke apart, John rested his forehead against Michael's. "We should go inside," he said, voice rough. "It's getting cold." They walked back to the soddy through the falling snow, not touching but orbiting each other like binary stars. Inside, the space felt suddenly smaller, charged with possibility. John fed the fire while Michael lit the lamps, both of them moving with exaggerated care, neither quite believing this was happening. "I've never..." Michael started, then stopped. "Neither have I," John said. "Not like this. Not with someone who matters." They came together again in the firelight, less tentative this time. John's hands found the buttons of Michael's shirt while Michael worked at John's, and they undressed each other slowly, reverently, mapping scars and calluses and the vulnerable places between. They made love carefully, learning each other's bodies and boundaries, and if there was awkwardness in the mechanics, there was also tenderness, patience, a sense of coming home to a place neither had known they were searching for. Afterward, they lay tangled together in Michael's narrow bed, John's arm around Michael's waist, Michael's head on John's chest, listening to his heartbeat gradually slow. "We can't stay here forever," John said quietly. "Eventually someone will come. The marshals or someone who knows my face. I know. I won't put you in danger. If they come, then we'll face it together." Michael lifted his head to look at John. "You said you ran because you couldn't prove your innocence. What if we could? What if we went back and found the truth?" "Michael, that's dangerous, stupid, probably impossible." Michael sat up. "But you can't run forever, John. And I don't want to live the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, afraid of the day you'll have to leave." John stared at him. "You want to go to Kansas City? Try to clear my name?" "I want to try. Maybe there's evidence the marshals didn't find. Maybe someone saw something. Maybe the real killer left a trail." Michael's voice strengthened with conviction. "You said Vincent Cross had enemies. Men who owed him money, men he'd ruined. One of them killed him and you took the blame. We find proof of that and you're free. And if we can't find proof? Then at least we tried. At least we fought instead of just running." Michael took John's hand. "You said everyone deserves one person who doesn't run away. Well, I'm not running. Not from this, not from you." John pulled him back down into an embrace that was almost desperate. "You're either the bravest man I've ever met or the most foolish. Probably both." They made plans late into the night, working out the details. They would go to Kansas City in the spring, after the worst of winter had passed. They would need money, supplies, and a strategy. But they had time now. Time to prepare, time to strengthen their resolve, time to build something worth fighting for. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the prairie in white, making the world feel clean and new. Part 4, Winter's Passage. Winter settled over the Oklahoma Territory with brutal efficiency. The blizzards came in waves, pinning Michael and John inside the soddy for days at a time. But they prepared well. The roof was solid, the walls chinked tight, and their stores would last until spring. The isolation that had nearly broken Michael now felt like a blessing, a cocoon protecting something fragile and precious. They developed routines that transformed the soddy into a home. John cooked breakfast while Michael tended the animals. They spent afternoons working on projects. Michael teaching John to read the more difficult books from his small library, John teaching Michael to shoot properly, to track game, to survive in ways his father never had. In the evenings they played cards or chess, competed over whose turn it was to wash dishes, and talked about the future in careful hypothetical terms. "When this is over," Michael said one night, "when your name is clear, what then?" John was quiet for a long time, staring into the fire. "I suppose I never let myself think that far ahead. Seemed like tempting fate. Tempted anyway. I'd want land of my own. Nothing big, just enough to work. Maybe closer to the mountains where water's more reliable." He glanced at Michael. "What about you?" "I'd want to go somewhere people don't know my family. Start fresh." Michael hesitated. "With you if you'd have me." John reached across the space between their chairs and took Michael's hand. "I'd have you. Every day for the rest of my life I'd have you." They made love that night with a passion born of certainty, no longer tentative or questioning. They were learning each other's bodies, yes, but also each other's souls. The rhythms of breath and touch that meant comfort or desire, the words that healed and the silences that spoke louder. But winter wasn't kind to secrets. In early January, a traveler came through, a peddler making his rounds despite the weather. John hid in the barn while Michael traded for supplies, but the peddler was chatty, hungry for gossip after days alone on the trail. "You heard about that killing back in Kansas City?" the peddler asked. "Marshall's still looking for the man who did it. John Marston, they say his name is. $50 reward now." Michael kept his expression neutral. "That's a lot of money." "Sure is. They say he's dangerous, killed a man in cold blood over a card game." The peddler leaned in conspiratorially. "But between you and me, I heard different. Heard the man who got killed was a cheat and a scoundrel, and maybe Marston wasn't the only one who wanted him dead." "What do you mean?" "Fellow I know in Kansas City said Cross had debts all over town. Gambling debts he couldn't pay. Some rough characters were looking for him the night he died." The peddler shrugged. "But the law wanted someone to hang and Marston ran, so that was that." After the peddler left, Michael found John in the barn, his expression tight with worry. "He knew your name." "Everyone knows my name by now. That's the problem." John paced. $50. That's enough to make even honest men think twice about helping a stranger. But he also said Cross had enemies. That's what we need, proof that someone else wanted him dead. Proof that's 300 miles away, and I can't exactly walk into Kansas City and ask questions. "No," Michael agreed. "But I can." They argued about it for days. John insisted it was too dangerous, that Michael could be arrested for aiding a fugitive. Michael countered that he was already taking that risk by harboring John, and at least this way they'd be working toward a solution. Finally, exhausted and frustrated, they reached a compromise. They would go together but carefully with a plan. Over the following weeks they worked out the details. Michael would pose as a journalist writing about unsolved crimes in the frontier. John would stay hidden nearby, moving only at night while Michael did the investigating. They would need disguises, false names, and enough money to bribe their way to information if necessary. "We should practice," John said one evening. "You need to be able to lie convincingly, to ask questions without raising suspicion." So they rehearsed. John played various characters, suspicious bartenders, hostile witnesses, corrupt lawmen, while Michael refined his story. At first he was terrible at it, too honest and transparent. But John was patient, coaching him through the nuances of deception, teaching him when to press and when to retreat. "The key," John explained, "is to make people think they're smarter than you. Let them underestimate you and they'll tell you things they'd never reveal to someone they respected." Michael practiced his humble journalist persona until it felt natural, until he could ask impertinent questions with such innocent sincerity that John had to laugh. "You're going to be dangerous with that face," John said. "People are going to want to help you. That's the idea." As winter began to loosen its grip and the first hints of spring appeared in lengthening days and melting snow, their plans solidified. They would leave in early April, taking John's horse and the mule, carrying enough supplies for a month. They would avoid main roads where possible, travel at odd hours, and trust no one. "Once we do this, there's no turning back," John said the night before they planned to leave. "If we fail, I'll hang. And you'll be arrested as an accomplice. Then we won't fail." "Michael." "I'm not afraid." Michael took John's face in his hands. "I was dying here alone. Slowly, quietly, but dying all the same. You gave me a reason to live. Now let me help you do the same." John kissed him fiercely, desperately. They made love that night with an urgency edged with fear, holding each other as if they could press their bodies close enough to merge into one, to protect each other from whatever was coming. In the morning they loaded their supplies, locked the soddy, and turned their faces east toward Kansas City. Toward truth or ruin, justice or the gallows. Together. Part 5, Into the Lion's Den. The journey to Kansas City took 3 weeks of careful travel. They avoided towns where they could, camping in hidden hollows and moving mostly at dawn and dusk. John taught Michael the skills of a man on the run, how to cover tracks, how to read the land for pursuit, how to sleep light with one ear always listening. They saw other travelers occasionally but kept their distance. Once they spotted a pair of U.S. Marshals on the road and had to hide for 6 hours in a creek bed, standing in frigid water while the lawmen made camp barely 100 yards away. That night, shivering in their bedrolls, John held Michael close and whispered, "We can still turn back. I can disappear into Mexico and you can go home." "No," Michael said firmly. "We're seeing this through." As they neared Kansas City, they refined their plan. They found a camp about 5 miles outside town, near a bend in the Missouri River where cottonwoods provided cover. John would stay here while Michael went into the city. They'd meet each night to share information and adjust their strategy. "Remember," John said as Michael prepared for his first venture into town, "you're James Mitchell, a journalist from Philadelphia. You're writing a series about frontier justice and you heard about the Cross killing. You're curious, not accusatory. Friendly, a little naive." "I remember." Michael adjusted the spectacles they'd purchased from a peddler, plain glass, but they made him look bookish and harmless. "I'll start at the newspaper office, see what they reported at the time. Then I'll visit the saloon where Cross was found. Be careful. And if anything feels wrong, leave immediately." Michael kissed him quickly. "I'll be back tonight." Kansas City was larger than Michael had imagined, bustling with commerce and people. He found the newspaper office easily enough, a 2-story building on Main Street with the Kansas City Chronicle painted on the window. Inside, a harried editor named Samuel Pritchard looked up from a desk covered in papers. "Help you?" Pritchard asked, barely pausing in his work. "I hope so. My name is James Mitchell. I'm a journalist from Philadelphia." Michael had practiced the lie so many times it came out smoothly. "I'm researching frontier justice for a series of articles, and I heard about the Vincent Cross murder last fall. I was hoping to review your coverage of the case." Pritchard's expression shifted from annoyance to interest. "The Cross case? That's a story all right. Most excitement we've had in months." He gestured to a filing cabinet. "September and October editions are in there. Help yourself." Michael spent 2 hours reading through the accounts. The coverage was sensational but thin on details. Cross had been found dead in an alley behind the Lucky Dollar Saloon on the morning of September 15th. He'd been stabbed once, a deep wound to the chest. John Marston, who'd been seen fighting with Cross the previous evening, had fled town. A warrant had been issued, a reward posted. No other suspects mentioned. But between the lines, Michael noticed interesting omissions. No one quoted about Cross's character. No mention of his debts, his gambling, his business dealings. The articles painted him as a respectable businessman cut down in his prime, which didn't match what John or the peddler had said. "Mr. Pritchard," Michael asked, "did you know Vincent Cross personally?" Pritchard looked uncomfortable. "Knew of him. He had interests around town." "What kind of interests?" "The kind gentlemen don't discuss in print." Pritchard lowered his voice. "Look, Cross ran a gambling operation out of the Lucky Dollar. Not exactly legal, but Sheriff Holbrook looked the other way. Cross had money, influence. A lot of people owed him, if you understand my meaning." "Including the sheriff?" "I didn't say that. But his expression said plenty." Michael made careful notes. "Do you know who found the body?" "Bartender at the Lucky Dollar. Fellow named Patrick O'Reilly. He still works there if you want to talk to him." Michael thanked Pritchard and headed for the saloon. The Lucky Dollar was quiet in the afternoon, just a few day drinkers nursing beers. The bartender was a stocky Irishman with a florid face and wary eyes. When Michael introduced himself and mentioned Cross, O'Reilly's expression shuddered. "Already told the law everything I know. I'm not the law, just a writer trying to understand what happened." Michael deliberately fumbled with his notebook, playing up his harmless journalist persona. "You found Mr. Cross's body?" "Came in to open up, found him in the alley. Blood everywhere. Sent for the sheriff right away. Must have been terrible. Did you hear anything the night before? A fight maybe?" O'Reilly polished a glass with elaborate care. "There was a fight earlier that evening. Cross and some drifter. They took it outside, had words. Drifter left, Cross went back to his card game. And then Cross left around midnight, said he had business. That was the last time anyone saw him alive." "What kind of business?" "Didn't say. But Cross always had business. Cards, loans, collecting what people owed." O'Reilly met Michael's eyes. "Look, friend, I'll tell you what I wouldn't tell the law. Cross wasn't a good man. He ruined people. That drifter, Marston, he wasn't the only one who had a grudge. Cross had plenty of enemies." "Like who?" But O'Reilly shook his head. "I've said too much already. You seem like a decent fellow, so I'll give you some advice. Don't dig too deep into Vincent Cross. Some stones are better left unturned. Michael left the saloon with more questions than answers. He spent the rest of the day talking to shopkeepers, city officials, anyone who might have known Cross. The picture that emerged was of a man who'd built a small empire on other people's desperation. Gambling debts, predatory loans, blackmail. And every person Michael spoke to seemed afraid, as if Cross's ghost still held power over them. As the sun set, Michael returned to the camp by the river. John was pacing, anxious. He pulled Michael into a fierce embrace the moment he arrived. Thank God. I've been imagining every disaster. I'm fine. And I learned things. Michael shared what he discovered while they ate a cold supper. Cross had enemies, John. Lots of them. The newspaper buried the truth, and the sheriff seems to have been in Cross's pocket. But O'Reilly, the bartender, he as much as admitted there were other suspects. Did he give you names? No. He was too scared. But he mentioned Cross had business that night, collecting debts, maybe. Someone he was meeting. Michael's eyes brightened. What if that someone killed him? What if the real killer was supposed to meet Cross in that alley? That's a lot of speculation. But it makes sense. You fought with Cross, left him alive, and then someone else killed him later. The question is who, and how do we prove it? They talked late into the night, building theories and discarding them. Finally, exhausted, they slept wrapped in each other's arms, the sound of the Missouri River a constant whisper in the darkness. Part 6. Secrets and Shadows. Over the next week, Michael returned to Kansas City each day, slowly piecing together Vincent Cross's final hours. He discovered that Cross had kept meticulous records of his loans and gambling debts in a ledger, but the ledger had disappeared after his death. He learned that Cross had been pressuring a local merchant named Howard Brennan to pay an outstanding debt of $300, money Brennan didn't have. He found out that Cross's gambling operation had been under threat from a rival outfit run by a man named Dutch Kerrigan, who'd warned Cross to close up shop or face consequences. Each night, Michael returned to camp with new information, and he and John would analyze it together. But they kept hitting dead ends. No one would speak openly about Cross's business dealings. Everyone seemed terrified of retribution, even with Cross dead. There's something we're missing, Michael said one evening. Something everyone knows but won't say. The sheriff, John said suddenly. Holbrook. If he was in Cross's pocket, he might have had reason to protect Cross's business interests. Or to take them over after Cross died. They stared at each other as the implications sank in. If Sheriff Holbrook had killed Cross to take over his operations, he would have needed a scapegoat, someone to blame quickly so no one looked too closely at the crime. And John, a stranger who'd fought with Cross hours before the murder, had been perfect. We need to prove it, Michael said. But how? We can't exactly accuse a sheriff of murder without evidence. Cross's ledger. If we could find it, it might show what Holbrook was involved in, debts, bribes, whatever connected them. But where would it be? John thought for a moment. If Holbrook killed Cross, he would have taken the ledger. It's too valuable to destroy. It's a record of everyone who owed Cross money, everyone Holbrook could now control. He'd keep it somewhere safe. The sheriff's office? Maybe. Or his home. John met Michael's eyes. Which means we'd have to break in. Michael felt a chill. That's crossing a line. If we're caught, we're already wanted criminals in the eyes of the law. Me for murder I didn't commit, you for helping me. John took Michael's hands. But I won't ask you to do this. I can go alone. You've done enough, more than enough. You could still walk away, go back to your homestead, claim you were deceived. Stop. Michael's grip tightened. I'm not walking away. If we're doing this, we do it together. They spent 2 days watching Sheriff Holbrook's movements. He lived in a modest house on the edge of town, alone since his wife had died years before. He kept regular hours, at his office from 8 in the morning until 6 in the evening, then home for supper, then off and back to the Lucky Dollar Saloon until late. His house would be empty during the day, but breaking in during daylight was risky. At night, they'd have to wait until he was deeply asleep or away at the saloon. On the third night they made their move. Holbrook had gone to the Lucky Dollar at 9 o'clock, his usual pattern on Friday nights. John and Michael waited until 10, then approached the house from the back, moving through shadows like ghosts. Michael's heart hammered so hard he was sure the entire town could hear it. He'd never broken the law before, not like this, not deliberately. But John moved with calm efficiency, testing the back door until he found a window with a faulty latch. They slipped inside, and John lit a small candle stub, shielding the flame with his hand. The house was sparse and cold, more like a place to sleep than a home. They moved quickly through the main room, the kitchen, finding nothing. Then John opened a door to what must have been Holbrook's bedroom. A desk stood in the corner, and John went to it immediately, testing drawers. "Locked," he whispered. "Can you open it?" John pulled a thin piece of metal from his pocket, something he'd fashioned from wire, and worked at the lock. Michael kept watch at the window, his nerves screaming. Every sound from the street made him flinch. After what felt like an eternity, he heard a soft click. "Got it?" John breathed. The drawer contained papers, official documents, letters, receipts. John rifled through them quickly, and then his hands stilled. He pulled out a leather-bound ledger, opened it, and even in the dim candlelight, Michael could see his expression change. "This is it," John said. "Cross's ledger." Michael moved closer, looking over John's shoulder. The pages were filled with names, amounts, dates. But what caught his attention were the notations in different ink, additions made after Cross's death, in different handwriting. And there, on a page near the back, was a list of Cross's own debts. "Look at this," Michael whispered. Cross owed money to Holbrook. A lot of money. $2,000, dated 3 months before the murder. Cross was bleeding Holbrook dry, John said, scanning the entries. Regular payments, interest compounding. And look here, final payment due September 16th, with penalty of forfeiture of business interests. The day after Cross died. They stared at each other in the candlelight. The ledger was proof, not absolute but compelling. Holbrook had a powerful motive to kill Cross, and he'd gained control of Cross's entire operation afterward. But before they could discuss what to do next, they heard voices outside. John blew out the candle instantly. Through the window they saw Sheriff Holbrook walking up the path, and he wasn't alone. Another man was with him, their voices raised in argument. "We have to go," John whispered urgently. He shoved the ledger into his coat. They moved toward the back of the house, but heard the front door opening. They were trapped. John pulled Michael into a closet in the bedroom, closing the door just as footsteps entered the house. Through the crack they could see shadows moving, hear voices more clearly now. "Telling you, Kerrigan's getting impatient," the other man was saying. "He wants to know when you're handing over Cross's territory like you promised." "I'll handle Kerrigan," Holbrook's voice, sharp with irritation. "Tell him the ledger's secure and everyone's paying up just like before. Better, even. Nobody questions the law. And what about that drifter you pinned the killing on? If he surfaces." "He won't. Man's halfway to Mexico by now if he has any sense. And even if he comes back, who's going to believe him?" Holbrook laughed, a cold sound. "I made sure the story was clean. Marston fought with Cross, ran when Cross turned up dead. Simple as that." Michael felt John go rigid beside him in the darkness. Here was the confession they needed, but trapped as they were, there was no way to use it. They could only wait, barely breathing, while the two men talked. "Still say you should have just paid Cross what you owed instead of sticking a knife in him," the other man grumbled. "Watch your mouth, Carl. Walls have ears. Ain't nobody here but us. Just the same. That's history now. Cross got what was coming to him, and I got what should have been mine all along. Now get out of here. I'm tired." They heard the other man leave, then Holbrook moving around the house. Michael and John waited in tense silence as Holbrook prepared for bed. Every minute felt like an hour. Finally they heard snoring from the bedroom. John eased the closet door open. They could see Holbrook's form in the bed, silhouetted by moonlight through the window. They would have to pass right by him to reach the back door. One wrong move, one creaking floorboard, and everything would end in violence. John went first, moving with agonizing slowness. Michael followed, his heart in his throat. They were almost to the bedroom door when Michael's boot caught on something, a chair leg, and it scraped against the floor. The snoring stopped. John grabbed Michael's hand and they ran, abandoning stealth for speed. Behind them, Holbrook shouted in alarm. They burst through the back door and into the night, running for the cover of darkness as a gunshot cracked behind them. They didn't stop running until they reached the river camp, both of them gasping for breath. John pulled the ledger from his coat, checking to make sure it was intact, then pulled Michael into his arms. "That was too close," John said, his voice shaking with delayed fear. "Way too close. But we have it. We have proof." Michael's hands were trembling. "We heard him, John. He as much as confessed to killing Cross. Our word against the sheriff's. We need more." John opened the ledger again, studying it by moonlight. "But this is a start. This shows motive. And if we can get Carl, that other man, to testify about what Holbrook said." "How do we do that?" "I don't know yet. But we have something now. We have a chance." They broke camp immediately, knowing Holbrook would search for them come morning. They rode hard through the night, putting distance between themselves and Kansas City, and didn't stop until dawn when they found a cave in a limestone bluff where they could hide. As they caught their breath, Michael examined the ledger more carefully. Beyond the evidence of Holbrook's debt, there were dozens of other names, people Cross had victimized, people who might testify if they weren't afraid. And there, near the middle of the book, was an entry that made Michael's breath catch. "John, look at this. Thomas Whitmore, the farmer you tried to help. Cross had him down for $800 with a note. Land deed transferred as payment September 10th. That's 5 days before Cross died." "So Cross had already taken Whitmore's land," John said slowly. "Which means when I confronted him about it, he'd already won. You fighting him didn't change anything. And more importantly, it means Whitmore had no reason to kill Cross. The damage was already done." They spent the morning going through the ledger, building a picture of Cross's web of corruption and Holbrook's complicity. But they also realized the ledger alone wouldn't be enough. They needed someone to corroborate their story, someone Holbrook couldn't intimidate or discredit. "The U.S. Marshal's office," Michael said suddenly. "Not the local marshal, they probably know Holbrook. But the territorial marshal, someone from outside who might actually investigate." John looked skeptical. "You want to walk into a marshal's office and turn myself in?" "No, I want to walk into a marshal's office with evidence of corruption and murder, and ask them to do their jobs." Michael's conviction grew as he spoke. "We have the ledger. We have Holbrook's motive. We have a confession even if it's just our word. And we have me, someone with no criminal record who can testify to everything we've found. It's not enough to convict Holbrook yet, but it's enough to start a real investigation. Or it's enough to get us both killed. Maybe. Probably." Michael met John's eyes. "But I didn't come all this way to run again. Did you?" John was quiet for a long moment, his expression torn between fear and hope. Finally he shook his head. "No. I'm tired of running. If we're going to do this, let's do it right." Part 7. Truth Before Justice. They made their way to Independence, Missouri, where the territorial marshal had his office. It took 4 days of careful travel, avoiding main roads and sleeping rough. They arrived at the town dirty, exhausted and terrified but determined. The marshal's office was a sturdy brick building on the main street. Michael dismounted first, steadying himself. John stayed on his horse, ready to run if this went badly. "Wait for my signal," Michael said. "If I don't come out in 20 minutes, ride hard and don't look back." "Michael." "I mean it, John. One of us has to survive this." He walked into the office before John could argue. Inside, a young deputy looked up from a desk, then straightened when he saw Michael's road-worn appearance. "Help you? I need to speak with the territorial marshal. It's urgent. Marshal Dawson's in a meeting. You can wait or come back. It's about the Vincent Cross murder in Kansas City. I have evidence that the wrong man was accused." The deputy's expression sharpened. "Wait here." He disappeared through a back door. Michael waited, every second stretching into eternity. His hand rested on the ledger hidden beneath his coat. Everything depended on the next few minutes, whether the marshal would listen, whether justice existed anywhere in this corrupt system. The deputy returned with a man in his 50s, tall and weathered, with keen gray eyes that seemed to miss nothing. "I'm Marshal James Dawson. My deputy says you have information about the Cross case." "Yes, sir. My name is Michael Carver. I'm not a criminal, I'm not wanted for anything, but I have evidence that Sheriff Holbrook of Kansas City murdered Vincent Cross and framed an innocent man for it." Dawson's eyebrows rose. "That's quite an accusation. You have proof?" "I have Cross's ledger showing Holbrook owed him $2,000, due the day after Cross died. I have testimony that Holbrook took over Cross's criminal operations after his death. And I heard Holbrook confess to the murder with my own ears. Michael pulled out the ledger. It's all here. And I'll testify to everything under oath. Dawson took the ledger, flipping through it with practiced efficiency. His expression remained neutral, but Michael saw his jaw tighten as he read certain passages. Finally he looked up. Where did you get this? Michael hesitated, then decided on honesty. I stole it from Holbrook's house. I know that makes it legally questionable, but it's evidence of a crime, which gives me probable cause to investigate. Dawson's eyes sharpened. You said you heard a confession. Who else was present? This was the moment. Michael could lie, could claim he'd been alone. But John deserved better than more deception. John Marston was with me. The man Holbrook framed for Cross's murder. He's outside now, waiting to turn himself in if you'll promise to actually investigate instead of just hanging him. The deputy's hand moved toward his gun, but Dawson held up a hand. Stand down, Cooper. He studied Michael for a long moment. That takes either courage or stupidity, Mr. Carver. Why should I believe you're telling the truth? Because I have nothing to gain by lying. I own land in Oklahoma Territory. I have no criminal record. I came here voluntarily with evidence because John Marston saved my life, and I won't let him hang for a crime he didn't commit. Michael's voice strengthened. Read that ledger, Marshal. Really read it. You'll see corruption that goes beyond one murder. Holbrook's been using his badge to extort people for months, maybe longer. And if you let this go, he'll keep doing it. Dawson set the ledger on his desk. Bring Marston in. But tell him if he runs, I'll hunt him to the ends of the earth. Michael stepped outside. John sat rigid on his horse, clearly expecting the worst. He'll see you, Michael said quietly. It's going to be all right. You can't know that. No. But I believe it. John dismounted slowly and followed Michael inside. Marshal Dawson looked him over with professional assessment, taking in John's trail-worn appearance, his wary posture, the way his hand didn't move near his gun. John Marston? Yes, sir. You're wanted for the murder of Vincent Cross. I didn't kill him. I fought with him, I won't lie about that. But I left him alive, and hours later someone else put a knife in him. Why'd you run? Because I knew what I was, a drifter with no friends and a past I couldn't defend. And I knew what Cross was, a man with money and influence. The law wasn't going to look for another killer when they had me convenient. John's voice was steady, resigned. I was wrong to run. I know that now. But I wasn't wrong about Holbrook. He killed Cross and he used me to cover it up. Dawson considered this, then gestured to chairs. Sit. Both of you. Tell me everything from the beginning. They talked for 3 hours. Michael explained how they'd met, how they'd pieced together the truth about Cross's murder, what they'd found in the ledger. John described the fight with Cross, the accusations, his flight from Kansas City. Together, they recounted breaking into Holbrook's house and overhearing his conversation with Carl. Dawson listened without interrupting, taking notes occasionally. When they finished, he sat back and studied them both. This is a complicated mess. The evidence is suggestive but not conclusive. The ledger shows motive but not proof of murder. The confession you overheard is hearsay, I can't use it in court. And you're both confessed criminals now, having admitted to breaking and entering. Michael's heart sank. So you won't investigate? I didn't say that. Dawson tapped the ledger. I said it's complicated. But I've known Holbrook for years and something about the Cross case never sat right with me. Cross turning up dead right after a public fight was too convenient, too neat. And the way Holbrook closed the investigation so fast. He stood. I'll look into this. But Marston, you're staying in a cell while I do. I can't have you running again. I understand. And Carver, you're staying in town where I can find you. If I discover you've lied to me, you'll join Marston in that cell. I'm telling the truth, Marshal. We'll see. John was taken to a cell in the back of the office. Before they separated, he caught Michael's hand briefly. Thank you, he said quietly. For all of it. Don't thank me yet. We're not free. No. But we're not running anymore either. Marshal Dawson gave Michael a room at the boarding house and ordered him to stay put. For the next week, Michael lived in agonizing limbo. He wasn't allowed to see John, could only trust that Dawson was truly investigating and not just preparing a noose. He spent his days pacing the small room, his nights lying awake imagining every terrible outcome. On the 8th day, Dawson came to see him. "Pack your things. We're going to Kansas City." "What? What did you find?" "I found Carl Jessup, the man you heard talking with Holbrook. Took some persuading, but he's agreed to testify in exchange for immunity. Says Holbrook not only killed Cross but has been running a protection racket throughout the county." Dawson's expression was grim. "I also found 3 other witnesses who saw Holbrook with Cross on the night of the murder, after the time Marston left town. It's enough to arrest Holbrook and bring charges." "And John?" "He'll be released once Holbrook's in custody. Can't have 2 men charged with the same murder." Dawson paused. "You did good work, Carver. Dangerous and illegal work, but good nonetheless." They traveled to Kansas City with a full marshal's escort, 6 armed deputies plus Dawson, Michael, and John, who'd been released from his cell but was still officially in custody. The journey felt surreal to Michael after weeks of hiding and running, to be riding openly on the main roads. John rode beside him, and though they couldn't speak privately, their eyes met often. Each glance was a conversation. Relief, hope, fear of hoping too much, and underneath it all, the certainty of what they meant to each other. They reached Kansas City at noon on a bright spring day. Dawson deployed his deputies strategically, then walked into the sheriff's office with John, Michael, and 2 armed men flanking them. Sheriff Holbrook looked up from his desk, and his face went white when he saw John. Then red when he saw the ledger in Dawson's hands. "Marshal Dawson, what's the meaning of this?" "Sheriff Thaddeus Holbrook, I'm arresting you for the murder of Vincent Cross, for corruption, extortion, and obstruction of justice." Dawson's voice rang with authority. "You have the right to." Holbrook lunged for the gun on his desk. Everything happened at once. John shoved Michael behind him. The deputies raised their weapons. Dawson's gun was already drawn. "Don't," Dawson said cold and calm. Holbrook froze, his hand on the gun but not lifting it. For a moment, Michael thought he'd do it anyway, force them to shoot him rather than face trial. But then his shoulders sagged and his hand fell away. "How?" Holbrook asked, looking at John with something like disbelief. "I didn't run far enough," John said. "And I found someone who believed the truth mattered more than convenience." They shackled Holbrook and led him to his own cells. The scene drew a crowd, townspeople gathering to see their sheriff arrested, whispering and pointing. Michael saw Patrick O'Reilly in the crowd, the bartender from the Lucky Dollar, and their eyes met. O'Reilly nodded once, a gesture of respect, and Michael understood that the truth had been waiting all along for someone brave enough or foolish enough to demand it. Part 8. Trials and Tribulations. The trial took place in early June, after weeks of investigation and testimony from dozens of witnesses. The territorial judge came from St. Louis to ensure impartiality. Michael sat in the courtroom every day, watching justice unfold with painful slowness. The prosecution built their case methodically. Carl Jessup testified that Holbrook had planned Cross's murder for weeks, waiting for an opportunity when someone else could take the blame. The ledger was entered as evidence, showing Holbrook's crushing debt and the financial motive. 3 witnesses placed Holbrook near the scene of the crime at the time of the murder. The knife that killed Cross was found in Holbrook's office, wrapped in an old shirt and hidden in a locked drawer, still stained with blood that was confirmed to match Cross's type. John testified about his fight with Cross and his subsequent flight, and the courtroom hung on every word. He was honest about everything. His anger at Cross, the violence of their confrontation, his decision to run rather than trust the law. His honesty was damning in some ways but also compelling. He wasn't trying to paint himself as a hero, just as a man who'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Michael testified about their investigation, and though the defense tried to discredit him as John's accomplice, his steady demeanor and detailed records made him a credible witness. He explained everything they'd discovered, walking the jury through their reasoning step by step. The trial lasted 2 weeks. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood and read the verdict. "We find the defendant, Thaddeus Holbrook, guilty of murder in the first degree." Michael closed his eyes in relief. Beside him, John's hand found his under the cover of the bench between them, a brief squeeze that said everything. Holbrook was sentenced to hang. His execution was scheduled for July 15th, giving him time to appeal, though everyone knew the appeal would fail. The evidence was too overwhelming, the testimony too consistent. After the verdict, Marshal Dawson approached John in the courthouse hallway. "Mr. Marston, all charges against you are hereby dropped. You're a free man." John stared at him as if not quite believing it. "Just like that. Just like that. Though I'll note that you still confessed to breaking and entering, which technically I could prosecute. But given the circumstances, I'm inclined to call that matter settled." Dawson's stern expression softened slightly. "Go live your life, Marston. Stay out of trouble." They walked out of the courthouse into brilliant sunshine. Michael felt lightheaded, almost dizzy with relief. It was over. Really over. John was free, cleared of all charges, his name restored. "What do we do now?" Michael asked. John turned to him, and for the first time since they'd met, his expression was completely open. No wariness, no shadows, just hope. "Whatever we want." They collected their horses and left Kansas City that afternoon, riding west with no particular destination in mind. That night, they made camp beside a creek, and for the first time in months, they made love without fear hanging over them, without the specter of the gallows in every touch. "I never thought I'd have this," John said afterward, holding Michael close under the stars. "A future. Freedom. Someone to share it with. What do you want from that future?" "I told you once. Land of my own, somewhere quiet. Maybe near the mountains." John pressed a kiss to Michael's temple. "A place where we can just be ourselves. No hiding, no pretending. People will talk. People will know what we are to each other. Let them talk. I've spent too much of my life running from who I am. I'm done with that." John propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at Michael in the firelight. "I love you. I should have said it before, but I was afraid. Afraid it would make it harder when everything fell apart. But it didn't fall apart. We didn't fall apart. And I love you." Michael pulled him down into a kiss. "I love you too. Have since that first night in the barn, probably. Maybe even earlier. So what do you say? Want to build a life with an ex-outlaw? An ex-outlaw who was never an outlaw at all. Just a good man in a bad situation." Michael smiled. "Yes, to all of it. The land, the mountains, the life. All of it, as long as it's with you." They spent the next weeks traveling leisurely westward, exploring the territories, looking for the right place. They found it in late summer in Colorado, in a valley between mountains where a creek ran cold and clear. The land was unclaimed, beautiful, isolated enough for privacy but not so remote they'd be completely cut off from the world. They filed their claim and began to build. It was hard work, clearing land, building a cabin, establishing a homestead from scratch. But it was good work, purposeful, and they did it together. By the time the first snow fell, they had a sturdy cabin with a stone fireplace, a barn for their animals, and a winter's worth of supplies laid in. Part 9. Home. Spring came to the Colorado mountains with a rush of meltwater and wildflowers. Michael stood in the doorway of their cabin, watching John work with the two horses they'd acquired over the winter, a mare for breeding and a young stallion. John had a gift with animals, a patience and intuition that Michael admired. They'd been in Colorado for 8 months now, and the rhythm of their life had settled into something comfortable and sustainable. They worked their land, raised livestock, and occasionally traveled to the nearby town of Silver Creek for supplies and news. Some people in town knew or suspected what John and Michael were to each other, but most didn't care. The frontier had a way of making people practical. If you worked hard and caused no trouble, your private business was your own. Michael had started writing again, something he'd abandoned after his family left. He was working on a book about frontier justice, using their experience with the cross case as a foundation. John encouraged it, saying the story deserved to be told, how corruption could flourish in small places, how ordinary people could demand accountability if they were brave enough. In April they had visitors. Marshal Dawson rode up to their cabin with a young deputy Michael didn't recognize. For a heart-stopping moment, Michael feared more trouble, more accusations. But Dawson dismounted with a smile. "Relax, Carver. I'm not here in official capacity." "Then why are you here?" John asked, emerging from the barn. "Heard you two settled in these parts. Wanted to see for myself how you were doing." Dawson accepted Michael's invitation for coffee, and they sat on the porch while the deputy tended the horses. "Also wanted you to know, Holbrook was hanged last month. Died cursing you both for what it's worth." "I hope he found whatever peace he was looking for," Michael said, meaning it. Holding on to anger seemed pointless now. "You're more generous than I'd be." Dawson sipped his coffee. There's something else. The territorial governor heard about your case, about how you two uncovered the corruption when law enforcement failed. He's proposing reforms, better oversight of local sheriffs, requirements for federal investigation in cases where the accused claims innocence. He wanted me to thank you officially. We didn't do it for recognition, John said. I know. But recognition matters sometimes. What you did, standing up when it would have been easier to run, insisting on truth when lies were convenient, that matters. It changed things. Dawson set down his cup. The governor also wanted me to offer you both positions as deputy marshals if you're interested. Says men with your integrity and determination are rare. Michael and John exchanged glances. The offer was tempting in some ways. A chance to continue the work they'd started, to fight corruption and help people who couldn't help themselves. But Michael saw the answer in John's eyes before he spoke it. Thank you, Marshal, John said. But we've had enough of adventure. We're happy here building something quiet and ours. Dawson nodded as if he'd expected that answer. Can't say I blame you. But if you ever change your minds, the offer stands. He stood to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, I'm glad things worked out for you both. Not many men get second chances like you did. Make the most of it. After Dawson left, Michael and John sat on the porch in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the mountains. The air smelled of pine and snowmelt, clean and sharp. Do you ever regret it? Michael asked. Not taking a different path? You could have made it to Mexico, started completely fresh. And never met you? John took his hand, intertwining their fingers. Never had this? No, I don't regret it. Running would have been easier, but easier isn't always better. This, us, this land, this life, this is worth every hard moment it took to get here. Even the parts where we thought we'd hang? Even those. John smiled. Besides, you make terrible coffee. Someone has to stick around to do it properly. Michael laughed and shoved him. My coffee is fine. It's awful. Tastes like creek water and regret. You're not exactly. John kissed him, effectively ending the argument. When they broke apart, both of them were smiling. These were the moments Michael treasured most. Not the dramatic confrontations or narrow escapes, but the quiet, ordinary intimacy of two people who'd chosen each other and kept choosing each other every day. As summer deepened, they continued to build their homestead. Michael's book was taking shape, and he'd begun corresponding with a publisher in Denver who was interested in the manuscript. John had successfully bred their mare, and the foal born in June was healthy and strong. They planted a garden, Michael more successful this time with John's help, and watched it grow. In August, Michael received a letter. He recognized the handwriting on the envelope immediately, his sister Rebecca. His hands shook as he opened it.
Dear Michael, I hope this letter finds you. It took considerable effort to track down your whereabouts. I heard from Mr. Pritchard at the Kansas City Chronicle about what you did, how you helped clear an innocent man's name and exposed Sheriff Holbrook's corruption. He mentioned you'd gone to Colorado. I'm writing to apologize. When Father decided to leave, Sarah and I should have stood up for you. We should have refused to go, or at least demanded answers about why you were being abandoned. Instead, we went along quietly because it was easier, because speaking up would have meant conflict, and we were cowards. I won't make excuses. What Father did was wrong, and what we did or didn't do was equally wrong. You deserved better from your family. We're in St. Louis now. Father is working as a clerk, miserable and bitter. Mother asks about you constantly but is too ashamed to write herself. Sarah is engaged to a banker's son. And I've been thinking about the kind of person I want to be. The kind of person who stands up for what's right even when it's difficult. I don't expect forgiveness. I'm not even sure I deserve to ask for it. But I wanted you to know that I'm sorry and that I'm proud of you. What you did took tremendous courage. You've become the kind of person I aspire to be. If you ever want to write back, I'd welcome it. If not, I understand. With love and regret, Rebecca.
Michael read the letter 3 times, emotions warring in his chest. Anger at being abandoned, grief for the family he'd lost, a tentative hope at Rebecca's words. He showed the letter to John that evening. What are you going to do? John asked. I don't know. Part of me wants to write back, to rebuild some connection with her. But part of me is still so angry. Those feelings can coexist. You don't have to choose between forgiving her and acknowledging the hurt. John put his arm around Michael's shoulders. Take your time. When you know what you want to say, you'll say it. Michael carried the letter with him for a week, reading it occasionally, thinking about Rebecca's words. Finally, one evening he sat down and wrote a response. Dear Rebecca, thank you for your letter and for your apology. I won't pretend the abandonment didn't hurt. It did deeply. But I also recognize that you were in an impossible position, and that standing up to Father would have required courage you weren't ready to summon at that time. I'm glad you're thinking about the kind of person you want to be. That's a question I've been wrestling with too. I've learned that being true to yourself is both harder and more important than I ever imagined. I'm doing well here in Colorado. I've built a good life with a good man, John Marston, the man whose innocence I helped prove. We have land, plans for the future, and something I never expected to find: peace. I forgive you, Rebecca. Not because what happened doesn't matter, but because holding on to anger would only poison the life I'm building. I hope you'll find your own courage, your own truth, whatever that looks like for you. You're welcome to write again if you'd like. I'm not ready for visits or reunions with the rest of the family, but I'd like to know my sister again if she's willing. Yours, Michael. He sent the letter the next time they went to town, and felt lighter for having written it. Whether Rebecca would write back, whether their relationship could be rebuilt, remained to be seen. But he'd said what needed saying, and that was enough for now. Part 10: Legacy. Autumn painted the mountains in gold and crimson. Michael and John stood together at the edge of their land, watching the wind move through the aspens like a quiet tide. The years had softened the sharpness of survival into something steadier, purpose, maybe even peace. The cabin had grown since those first months. A proper porch now wrapped around the front, its posts carved by John's hands during long winters. The barn had been expanded, its beams straight and strong. Fences stretched across the valley, marking not possession but care, evidence of a life tended, not conquered. Michael had learned that love, like land, required patience. You didn't force it into shape. You listened to it, worked with it, let it tell you what it needed. They'd taken to walking the property each morning together, a ritual neither had named but both cherished. Today, John carried a basket of apples from the late harvest, while Michael held a small notebook, already half filled with observations and half-formed sentences. You're thinking again, John said, smiling. I always think, Michael replied. I just don't always write it down. And today I'm thinking about legacy. John raised a brow. Sounds heavy for before breakfast. Michael smiled. Not the kind carved in stone. The kind that lives in people. They stopped near the creek where the water ran clear over smooth stones. The place where, months ago, they had first spoken about the future without fear. I used to think legacy was blood, Michael continued. Family names. Sons and daughters. Land passed down. He glanced at John. But now I think it's something else. It's what we leave better than we found it. Who we protect. Who we teach to stand. John considered that. So what are we leaving behind? Michael gestured around them. This place. A home where no one has to hide. Where kindness isn't dangerous. He paused, then added softly, and stories. Ones that tell the truth even when it's hard. John reached for his hand. You're writing again. I am. That book you started, about the trial? Yes. But not just the trial. About what happens when people choose courage over comfort. When they decide that justice isn't something handed down, it's something built. John smiled slowly. You're going to get people thinking. That's the idea. They walked back toward the house together. Smoke curled from the chimney. Inside, bread baked in the oven, and the familiar warmth of their shared life waited. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, a rider appeared on the distant trail. A young man, dusty and unsure, slowing as he approached the homestead. John noticed first. We've got company. Michael shaded his eyes. He looks lost. They waited as the rider dismounted, hat in hand. Sorry to bother you, the young man said. I was told there might be work here. Or at least someone who wouldn't turn me away. Michael and John exchanged a glance, recognition passing between them, a memory of who they had once been. There's always work, John said gently, and always room for a meal. The young man exhaled in relief. As they led him toward the house, Michael felt something settle into place. This was it. Not just survival, not just love, but continuation. Later that night, lying beside John, Listening to the wind move through the trees, Michael thought about how stories outlived their tellers. How truth, once spoken, could travel farther than fear ever could. "What are you smiling about?" John murmured. "Just thinking," Michael said softly, "about how we didn't just survive the world. We changed a small corner of it." John pulled him closer. "That's more than enough." Outside, the mountains stood silent and eternal, bearing witness to two men who had chosen courage, chosen love, and built something that would outlast them both. And in the quiet, their legacy took root, not in blood or law, but in kindness, truth, and the brave act of staying. Epilogue, 2 decades later. The first thing you noticed about the valley 2 decades on was that it didn't feel wild anymore. Not tamed, nothing so arrogant as that, but held, cared for. The fences stood straight. The barn's roof didn't sag. The smoke from the chimney rose steady and calm, the way it did from places where people ate regular meals and slept without fear. The boy, though he wasn't really a boy, not at 19, reined his horse at the edge of the property and sat there longer than he meant to. He'd been told the place was real. That two men lived out here who didn't ask questions that could ruin your life. That if you came hungry you'd be fed. If you came scared you'd be safe. But rumors had teeth. They always did. He'd grown up hearing whispers. The marshal that got hanged. The gambler's ledger. The book that named names. The cabin in the mountains where two men lived like they'd stolen happiness and dared God to take it back. He swallowed, tightened his grip on the reins, and rode up anyway. A dog barked once, more announcement than warning. Then the front door opened. A man stepped out onto the porch, broad-shouldered and sun-browned, his hair gone more silver than dark, but his posture still straight, still watchful. He moved like someone who'd once lived on the edge of violence and never forgot what it cost to survive it. "Afternoon," the man called. The young rider stopped at the gate, unsure whether to dismount. "Afternoon, sir." The man's eyes swept over him, taking in the dust on his boots, the nervous set of his shoulders, the way he kept his hands visible like he'd learned that habit for a reason. "You lost?" the man asked. The rider hesitated, then said the truth. "I'm looking." The porch man leaned his weight against the railing. "For what?" The young man's voice came out rough. "A place where I don't have to be someone else." For a heartbeat the older man didn't move. Then something in his expression softened. Not pity, not surprise. Recognition. Like the young man had just spoken a language he'd been fluent in once. "Hold on," the man said and stepped back inside. A moment later, another man appeared in the doorway behind him. Slightly shorter, leaner, with wire-gray hair and spectacles that looked like they belonged to a schoolteacher. The lines around his eyes were deep from sun and laughing both. He carried a mug of coffee like it was an extension of his hand. He looked at the young rider the way a writer looks at a blank page, not with suspicion but with interest. "John?" the second man asked quietly, as if confirming something he already knew. "Yeah," the porch man John said. "He's here." Michael stepped onto the porch beside him, the two of them standing shoulder to shoulder like they'd been doing it all their lives. The young man swallowed again. He hadn't expected them to look ordinary. He'd expected legends. Michael's gaze caught his and held. "You got a name?" The rider opened his mouth, then closed it. He'd been using the wrong name for months. A borrowed one. A safe one. The one his father had insisted on, like the right name could hammer him into the right shape. His voice wavered. "I do. I don't know if I'm allowed to use it anymore." John's jaw tightened and Michael's eyes softened. Michael stepped down off the porch and walked toward the gate slowly, hands open, no sudden movements, like he was approaching a skittish animal. "You're allowed," Michael said. "Whether the world agrees with you or not." The young man blinked hard because it was a ridiculous thing to cry at. Some stranger's simple sentence. But something inside him cracked anyway. "I'm Eli," he managed. "Eli Archer." John nodded once like that settled something important. "Eli, you hungry?" Eli's throat worked. "Yes, sir." "Don't sir me," John said, though not unkindly. "Makes me feel like I'm about to arrest you." Michael's mouth twitched. "He only arrests people who insult his cooking." "Only when I'm in a generous mood," John added. It was, God help him, normal. Warm. The kind of teasing that belonged to people who'd kept choosing each other until it became a language all its own. Michael opened the gate. "Come on. We've got stew on. And bread if John didn't burn it." "Didn't burn it?" John said defensively. Only slightly committed a crime against Flower. Eli let out a sound that was almost a laugh, surprised to find it still lived in him. He dismounted and followed them up the path. Inside, the cabin smelled like herbs and wood smoke and something sweet baked earlier in the day. The walls were lined with shelves of books and jars of preserved fruit. A rifle hung above the mantel, not as decoration but as reminder. A pair of worn hats rested on hooks by the door. 2 coats. 2 mugs. 2 chairs pulled close to the fire like they belonged there. On the table near the window sat a book, well-loved, spine creased and pages dog-eared. Eli recognized the title immediately. Truth Before Justice. A chronicle of frontier corruption and the men who refused to run. He'd seen it once in a general store, slipped between Bibles and almanacs like someone had been trying to hide it in plain sight. Michael saw him looking. "You've read it?" Michael asked. "Not all of it," Eli admitted. "Just pieces. Where I could." John snorted. "He wrote the whole thing and still acts surprised when it follows us around." Michael rolled his eyes. "It's a small world with big mouths." Eli stared at the book like it might bite him. "People say it changed things." Michael's expression went distant for a moment. "It helped. Some. It made it harder for bad men to pretend they were good just because they wore a badge." John set bowls on the table. "And it made it easier for certain decent folks to find their way here when they needed to." Michael's eyes met Eli's again. "Sometimes. That was the point." They ate. Eli tried to eat slowly, tried not to look like a starving thing, but the first bite of stew nearly undid him. Warmth spread through him, through his hands, his chest, places he'd forgotten could feel safe. After, Michael poured coffee, and John leaned back in his chair with the tired ease of a man who'd worked hard and earned his rest. "So," John said, "who are you running from?" Eli's stomach tightened. Michael's voice cut in gently. "You don't have to tell us tonight." John nodded. "Or ever if you don't want. But if somebody's coming to hurt you, I'd like a head start on deciding how much trouble I'm willing to cause." Eli stared at them, these 2 men who looked like a farmer and a writer, who spoke like they'd learned the shape of fear and refused to let it rule their home. His mouth opened before he could stop it. "My father says I'm sick." Silence. Not the dangerous kind. The listening kind. Eli kept going, words spilling out like water from a broken bucket. "He said I'd disgrace the family. Said he'd rather bury me than let anyone see what I am. He sent me to a preacher. Tried to beat it out of me. Then he said he'd send me west to work a ranch where men would fix me." His voice cracked. "I left before he could." Michael's face went still in a way Eli recognized, anger held very carefully like a blade in a sheath. John's hand tightened around his coffee mug, knuckles whitening. Michael spoke first softly. "You're not sick." Eli blinked rapidly. "Everyone says." "Everyone can be wrong," John said flatly. Michael reached across the table and set his hand over Eli's, warm and steady. "Listen to me. You don't need fixing. You need safety. You need time. And you need to know this. You can build a life that doesn't require permission." Eli's throat burned. "How?" John leaned forward slightly. "One day at a time. Same as we did." Eli looked between them. "People don't bother you? Out here?" John's mouth curved, sharp and honest. "Some tried. Years ago. Then they learned we don't live up here alone." Michael added, gentler, "And even when they talk, talking doesn't kill you. Shame does. Loneliness does. We decided not to die of either." Eli stared at them like they were something mythic after all, not because they were famous but because they were real. Outside, wind moved through the aspens, and the cabin held its warmth like a promise. Later, when Eli had been shown to a small room with a clean bed and a quilt stitched by hands that believed in tomorrow, he lay awake listening to the quiet sounds of the house. Floorboards creaked softly. Low voices murmured. Then laughter, quiet, familiar, the kind that came from long knowing. In the main room, Michael sat at the table with his notebook open, writing by lamplight. John stood behind him, reading over his shoulder. "You're going to put him in the book," John said. Michael didn't look up. "No names. Not his." John's hand rested on Michael's shoulder, easy, intimate. "Good." Michael paused his pen, then asked softly, "Do you ever think about what we almost didn't have?" John's answer came without hesitation. "Every time I wake up beside you." Michael's breath hitched, Still, after all these years. John bent and kissed the top of his head. We did all right, kid. Michael laughed quietly. Don't call me kid. I'm older than you now. John scoffed. Lies. Math. Blasphemy. Michael set his pen down and leaned back into John's touch. You know what I think legacy is? John's voice was gentle. Tell me. Michael's eyes drifted toward the hall where Eli slept. I think it's this. The moment someone like him realizes he's not alone. John's hand squeezed his shoulder once. Then we've got plenty of legacy. Michael picked up his pen again. Outside, the valley held steady under starlight, an ordinary place made extraordinary by two men who had refused to run, and who kept the porch light on, decade after decade, for anyone brave enough to follow it home.